So an update, and this is a specific update on the GPS in the Twin Otter. Now, most people that have seen my custom built external screen GPS have been pretty impressed, and I'm pretty pleased with it myself actually, and I've used it for a couple of months now and it works great, but it's not perfect, and there's one very specific issue with it that started out as a little nag and really you know, it's much more than a nag. It pretty much renders the thing barely usable in some ways, so I'm going to just try and explain that. But before I do that, I'll just mention that the solution is going to involve ditching the Aerosoft Twin Otter Extended built-in GPS. I'm not ditching it, you can't ditch it, it's built into the virtual cockpit. But I've bought the rxpGNS 530, which sounds like it's a like-for-like replacement, but actually, you know, as soon as you start to look at the Reality XP, you realise that the GNS 530 built into the Twin Otter Extended is nothing of the sort. It's basically the G500 standard GPS functionality behind a nicer looking facade, and the only thing it really adds from the genuine GNS 530 is it allows you to control and display the nav and comm radios, but everything else is missing. So what we've got here, if you can see, is we've got an embarrassment of GPSs. We've got this set up very artificially, obviously. So over here we've got, this is the virtual cockpit GNS 530 in the Twin Otter Extended, and below it we've got the 2D version of the same panel, which I've opened and carefully positioned and sized. And I should say these are sized at about the same size as they are on my, the thing you can't see, which is my external 7-inch monitor, which is where I normally run the GPS. What else can I show you? To the top left of that we've got the Reality XP Garmin GNS 530, that's the real deal. Again resized to be about the same dimensions. And at the bottom left, just for further comparison, we've got the FSX default Garmin G, what's that called, the G500 or GN 500, GPS 500 it says on there. And currently we're just kind of orbiting roughly a couple of thousand feet over, well, in the vicinity of Harvey Field in Washington State. And just out of interest, what you can see over on the left, at the extreme left of the screen, is the Reality XP GPS, but it's the window only, so we haven't got the border, the bezels with the buttons and knobs. And I figured out how, well, I didn't figure out how to do that, I found out how to do that just by googling for it. And you can do that by editing, quite simply, panel.cfg for the aircraft that you're putting this in, and it creates an independent panel that crops those edge parts off. So it's independent from, I've got the full Reality XP thing there as well, but brought up as a separate panel. I've got the window only. Now that's fantastic for using on the external monitor. I just need to drag it there and size it to the appropriate size and shape. What I haven't got figured out yet is to make it default to the right size, but I just need to work on the numbers to get that done. So anyway, that's just an aside. So for our purposes, why are we looking at this? Well, if you look at these two on the right, the virtual cockpit GPS is pretty much mirrored. So you can see we've got everything that's shown on the virtual cockpit is shown on the 2D panel as well. We zoomed to a 20 miles radius, so the top to the bottom of the display is 20 miles, and we can see the airspace, we can see a couple of airfields, we can see the ILS feathers and so on. Actually the ILS feathers are not shown on the, I've just noticed on the virtual cockpit. I'm not sure why that is, maybe that's a setup thing, but it looks pretty good. So the problem with this isn't immediately obvious, but if I try and move it onto my external monitor, first thing you're going to notice is it's too small for the monitor. so we've got to resize it, and because we don't want to see the bezels and the knobs and things, we actually want to resize it bigger than the monitor. So I'm going to temporarily move it back onto the main screen, and I'm going to resize it. So that's the size that I'm going to need to drag it back onto my external monitor. Now you may not have noticed the problem, but if I point it out, if you look at the labels and the icons for the airfields and the VORs and the NDBs and so on, they're the same size on this resized, much bigger display as they are in the virtual cockpit. In fact, it's worse than that because they're actually smaller on that very much enlarged GPS. They're quite readable at this size, but the point is they're exactly the same size as they were when the GPS was this size. That means they're not being resized. The labels are basically being drawn at a constant scale, regardless of the size that we make the window. And if I just, by contrast, do the same trick with the Reality XP GPS, move this onto that screen, I'll just roughly size it to the same size as the screen. We see there's a difference. We can see those labels are much bigger than they were when the window was smaller. So in other words, they're being resized up as the window is scaled up. And as another experiment, if we take the standard GPS 500 and we do the same trick with that, and again we see we're stuck with these little tiny labels that are drawn at the same size regardless of what you do to the size of the window. So let's check that out by comparing how these look on the small screen. First I'm going to move the Aerosoft 2D panel with approximately the right size onto the small screen. But there you can see the airport over here is a good size, but the labels are tiny, and the icons for the NDBs and the VORs and the other airports, that's a major airport, but there's the minor airports, they're very small. Basically those labels are unreadable. That's the Aerosoft Twin Otter extended fake GNS 530. If we try the standard Garmin 500, you can just about make out the text at this zoom factor. They're barely readable. So that's the standard GPS. And the last thing we're going to try the Reality XP genuine GN 530. Resized approximately, it's a little bit small, but it fits on. And as you can see, those labels are perfectly readable, and they've been resized completely appropriately for the size of the display. And that's what we need. We get a perfectly readable GPS display, and all the labels are very easily readable, unlike on either the default GPS or the 2D panel that comes with the Aerosoft Twin Otter extended. So the GNS 530 from Reality XP is actually a quality piece of kit, and you can immediately recognise that when you look behind the scenes and see how it's implemented. It's actually running Garmin's own simulator in the background. They sell this as a training aid for people who want to learn their GPS products without going out in the real aircraft and burning up fuel and hours and so on. So basically all the functionality provided by the Reality XP is provided by that Garmin simulator. That runs in the background, and there's an interface program that produces the display and manages the input and so on. And that means that everything the real GNS 530 can do, this one can do as well. And that includes, I've only scratched the surface myself, but it's got, it has an updatable database for which you do need to, if that matters to you, you've got to buy a subscription. to a database product, which I'm not going to bother to do. But it's got user definable waypoints. That's another thing that the standard one doesn't have. And indeed the database is updatable. I mean, that's, you know, that's a thing in its own right. The FSX database is way out of date, given that this was released in what, 2006 or something. What else? It's completely configurable. You know, just about every piece of behaviour in this GPS is configurable. For example, you know, you may be familiar in the standard GPS, it displays things like the estimated time en route, the ground speed, the desired track, all sorts of things. There's many different variables that you can display instead of those, all configurable from the GPS interface itself. What else? One thing I like about it is you can control the COM2 and NAV2 radios as well. You can there's a function to just swap between stack 1 and stack 2. So that's nice, especially for the Twin Otter, where I haven't built myself a panel for the COM and NAV2 radios, although I have been using the Cytec panel to control those. But I can control those directly from the GPS unit if I want. It's got very sophisticated. Well, another thing that a thing that's faked on the Aerosoft GNS 530 is the VNAV button. Rather strangely, switches in and out of terrain mode, which works just like it does on the standard GPS. That's not at all how the GNS 530 works. Terrain mode. In fact, it doesn't look as nice because it doesn't give you that detailed topographical map, but it gives you a very configurable terrain warning system and all sorts of things. You know, there's just too much to mention, even if I had learnt it all by now. There's a 230-page manual for how to use this from Garmin, and you can download it freely. I'll put a link to that manual in the description to this video. Just a couple of other things while I'm here talking about the GPS. You know, slight niggles, let's not play them down. Doing a GPS like this, you'll notice if you look around at products you can buy, hardware solutions to the GPS. There's three that I know of. One I can't remember the name of, but there's the VR Insight something or other. I can't remember, but it's a G500. I think it's basically an emulation of the standard built-in GPS for flight sim, but it comes with an external, you know, mounting with a little monitor and all the buttons you need. It doesn't look very nice. Well, it looks nice, but it doesn't look like the real thing really. But it runs in windowed mode only. You can't run it full screen, apparently. The other product I know about, the one I looked at in detail, is from EmuTech, and that runs the GNS 530, and it actually runs the GNS 530 from Reality XP. I'm not sure actually if that EmuTech comes with the Reality XP package, or whether you have to buy it separately. That's not clear on EmuTech's website. I suspect you have to buy it separately. But again, it says you have to run it in windowed mode, and it goes as far on the EmuTech site in the FAQ, frequently asked questions page, as to say that Flight Simulator cannot run gauges on an external monitor in full screen mode, and that's actually not true. That's patently not true. But what it's hinting at, and the reason it's not true is, you know, I do it all the time, and lots of other people I know do it. But I think what it's hinting at is the idea that I've gradually realised that there's major problems with doing that, running gauges and 2D panels on external monitors. It works fine, but there's problems with persistence. You can't save the positions of those 2D panels when they're off the main screen in full screen mode, and it's worse than that. You can screw things up if you try to do that. You get there's this bug where the cursor flashes between an hourglass and the mouse pointer perpetually, and also depending on the circumstances you lose completely the external, well in the GPS in this case, if you've tried to save the GPS off screen on an external monitor you can never get it back unless you go back and edit the flight file that you've saved manually. That's a text file, and that all just gets very complicated and messy. So I think that's the reason that people say you can't run these things in windowed mode. I've no doubt that you can run the EMU Tech. Well, I can't say I've no doubt because I haven't tried it, but I'm pretty sure that if you get the EMU Tech or even the VR Insight panel, you'll be able to run it in full screen mode, but you mustn't save the positions, and that means that every time you start the sim up you've got to drag the window onto the external monitor. So that's one problem. It means that every time I start up I've got to at least drag the window onto the monitor. The next problem is not much of a problem for me, but it's a problem in general. The way I've been running this so far is I've been resizing the Aerosoft 2D panel, dragging it to the external monitor so that it's clipped, so that it's big enough. I've resized it big enough so that when it's on the external monitor and positioned correctly, the bezels with all the knobs and buttons are clipped off. So all I see is the little window with the GPS display. And that works okay. I have had problems doing that in the past. It's caused instabilities with something to do with my graphics setup. The particular setup I've got at the moment, it's not unstable, it works fine. However, other people that have tried to do this and have commented on my videos have told me that when they position and this makes sense actually when you think about it, when you drag the monitor to the external monitor but it extends beyond the edges, part of that intrudes back onto the main FSX screen. And I didn't realise at first that, you know, it didn't occur to me that it was odd that doesn't happen to me. The only explanation I can find for why it's not happening to me is that I run my external monitor, my fourth monitor, on a second video card. It's not on the fourth port of my NVIDIA GTX 670. It's on a separate card, which is another cheaper NVIDIA card. But anyway, that's generally a problem, and that's also a problem that you have if you run in windowed mode. Now, one last thing is that problem goes away if you can arrange somehow to display the GPS without the bezels. There's no option to do that with the Aerosoft 2D panel. There's no option to do that with the Reality XP 2D panel. Incidentally, the Reality XP, there is a professional version, and it is my understanding that, and I don't know how much it costs, I think it costs a lot, but they're very cagey about how much it costs. They don't list that on the website. You have to like phone them up and ask, so it's probably out of my price range. But my understanding is that from what I've read, the professional version, which is presumably what's used in the EMU Tech device, among others, that has an ini file setting which is just a flag, 1 or 0, to display the window without the bezels. And rather cheekily, I think, they don't include that in the cheap one, the one they refer to as simtainment. I think they use that rather cumbersome phrase to describe their non-commercial products. But doing a bit of googling on this, I found a couple of places where people have described how to do this very easily, and I've done it and it works. Basically, I won't go into the details, you can Google for that. I'll put a link in the description about this as well. But you can just open up the panel.cfg for the aircraft that you're setting up, and you can create another window view that uses the Reality XP GNS 530 gauge, but somehow it seems to crop the window, so it just shows the active portion, and it installs that as a separate 2D panel, so you can bring up the 2D panel with the bezels on and the 2D panel without the bezels simultaneously, and they're perfectly synchronized. So that's absolutely fantastic. That's exactly what I need for the external monitor. Now there's one last problem really that you're going to have to live with for now if you're going to use the Reality XP GPS in the Aerosoft Twin Otter Extended, and that is, although the Reality XP comes with an installable 3D virtual cockpit gauge, that's not usable in the Twin Otter Extended, and Aerosoft have been very clear about this. You know, they tried evidently to liaise with Reality XP about how to make that installation work, and they got no joy, so they didn't make it work. And I haven't tried to install it, but the people that have, you know, haven't got it to work satisfactorily. So what it means is that you're kind of stuck with the Reality XP proper GNS 530 on the external monitor, driven by the hardware controls. I'll say a little bit about the hardware interface in a minute. But in the virtual cockpit you've got the default Twin Otter Extended default fake GNS 530, and it's not synchronized with the 2D panel. So the last thing I want to say is about the Reality XP 2D panel. It is fully drivable from hardware. It's drivable. There's no LVARs, or there's very few LVARs exposed by this that I can find. None of them are much use for automating it. But everything's drivable through keystrokes. So anything that can generate keystrokes can do anything you need to do on the Reality XP GPS without a mouse. So what I've had to do is, I'm using Linda for this, just like I have been all along, and actually Linda comes with a library for driving the Reality XP products. It's not completely usable out of the box, but generally, you know, it's got the wrapper functions there, lower functions, and they generate key codes. What is excellent is there's a comment in that library file, in the source file, that lays out the precise details of how to generate the key codes, and then the functions basically just send those key codes to FSX. The problem is the key codes that it uses by default, they all include the Alt key. So you've got, for example, Control, Shift, Alt, F3 or something like that to do one of the functions, for example. And whenever you invoke one of those functions, because the Alt key toggles the menu bar on and off, every time you invoke a GPS function the menu bar appears, which is pretty useless. So I've amended that to take out the Alt key from those functions, so I just got combinations of Control and Shift, and as long as you set up everything, you know, so you've got no duplicate, you've got nothing else that uses those keyboard commands, it works fine. You've got to set up the key codes in the rxpGNS.ini file, and that's described in the documentation for the for the Reality XP GPS. But basically it's just, again, some text editing, just to make sure that the key codes you send are the ones that you've configured in the RXP product. Another glitch with the Lynda library functions is, for some reason I don't understand, 6 of the key commands don't work. There's an error message when you load up FSX saying that 6 of the keys in turn can't be bound as hotkeys, and those are the ones that use, if I remember rightly, F1, F2, F3, F10, F11 and F12. I don't know what's special about those keys that can't be mapped to control the reality XP gauge. Many of the other functions are used in the Lynda libraries, but those 6 don't work, so I've just substituted other unused keys for those. So that's about it. Highly recommended Reality XP GNS 530. Works great. It's completely configurable. I haven't scratched the surface of it yet, but definitely a good product. $50. It costs $50 US, about 31, 32 pounds. If I get really enthusiastic, I might start to look at some of the other RXP products. They've got a weather radar, which looks pretty good, and then they've got some more complex gauges. Check them out, on the website.